Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio In, and I have here the Pula PA02. This has been getting a little bit of attention within the audio community, which is great, but there are lots of IEMs being released in this price range that perform above their price point. So if you want to be even a little competitive, at a minimum, you have to perform as well as all of the other competitors out there. But if you want to be on top, you have to go above and beyond that and beat out IEMs that are already, again, performing above their price point. So as usual, we'll go over what's included in the box, talk about the specifications and design, and then we'll see if we can determine whether or not this is just more white noise or if it's really a standout set. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. As for what's included in the box, we have the IEMs and cable, of course. That also includes a simple but well-made case and a really nice assortment of ear tips. The tips are decent, but I've actually been going back and forth between the Divinus Velvet ear tips and also the SpinFit W1s. The Velvet ear tips seem to work really well with the PA02, at least for me. Again, but these ear tips are fine. The PA02 is priced at $189, and it has a 1+4 hybrid driver setup. There are 4 balanced armature drivers that handle the highs and the mids, and then a dynamic driver for the low end. The drivers are housed in a resin shell that seems to be of decent quality. The design of the faceplate is very nice. I love all of the different colors, and when you look at it kind of closely, you can actually see that it has even a little bit of dimension and depth to it. So that's really cool, but it is kind of leaning on the blingy side just a little bit. It also seems to be constructed well. It's light, it feels fairly robust and durable, and it's held up pretty well for me with regular use. It's also comfortable. I was able to get a good seal and secure fit with the included tips, but again, when I switched over to the velvet tips, it just took that comfort up a notch. The cable is also very good. I love the hardware they used for the 3.5 termination splitter and the 2-pin connectors. The cable itself does feel just a little bit stiff, but it is still easy to manage, and I haven't really had any issues with tangling up to this point. Now, I will say the unboxing was a little bit underwhelming, but otherwise everything else, as far as the build quality, the design of the IEMs, the cable, the case, and the supplied ear tips are all still very good for this price point. Okay, let's move on to the sound. So the signature of the PA02 comes across as neutral to my ears. The bass presentation is neutral and the upper mids, while not being as forward as what you might see with a Harman style neutral type signature, there is still enough upper mid-range energy or Pina gain energy to balance out the bass. So the upper mid tuning is going to have a smoother, less forward presentation, similar to the SA6 MK2 and the Performer 8. I really like it, but if you prefer a more forward vocal presentation, then this might be a little too relaxed for you. So it's balanced, it has a neutral signature, and the upper mids have a somewhat smooth presentation. So that's the general sound signature of the PA02. But if we break things down a little further, starting with the bass, we know the bass presentation, again, we know it leans neutral and is going to be a little more polite as far as the amount of bass energy. Again, it reminds me a lot of the Performer 8. It also reminds me of the Performer 5 as well, as far as its bass quantity. And even the tuning curve itself. As a matter of fact, if you compare the graphs, you'll see lots of similarities, not just in the bass tuning, but the lower mid-range and the mid-range tuning as well. But the similarities are really just in the tuning. I would still have to give the Performer 5 and 8 the edge in terms of bass speed and dynamics. That being said, the PA02 does have good dynamics for this price point. So the dynamic driver is doing a great job delivering nice amounts of kick impact. The PA02's bass extension is also decent as well. So I'm getting adequate sub bass rumble, which is really nice. And the transition from the mid bass into the lower mids was also handled quite nicely. It does have some warmth in the lower mids, which does introduce just a little bit of bass bleed, but again, it's just a small amount, nothing really out of the ordinary for this type of approach when it comes to the tuning. And that extra low mid energy also brings some richness and note weight to instruments, which is nice if that's something that appeals to you. I like it a lot. And then moving up the frequencies a little further into the mids and upper mids, that same neutral presentation carries through. So unlike a V-shaped signature, the mids are a little more full and natural sounding. Nothing sounds thinned or sucked out. Everything sounds full and, again, fairly natural, at least in the mid-range. I did notice something going on with the treble though, and I will get to that in a minute. But in the mid-range, vocals and most instruments come across quite naturally. Now, when you get into the upper mids, like we talked about earlier, they do have a more relaxed presentation. And what that's gonna do with vocals and instruments, while they do sound natural, again, and generally correct, they aren't going to be as forward or have as much energy as what you might see with something with a more traditional neutral signature like the Origin EA1000 or Aria 2. That being said, they don't sound buried or overpowered in the mix. Vocals still have enough energy to keep the listener's attention, and they do still maintain good center focus. Now, moving on to the treble, the PA02 does do a really nice job as far as treble tuning overall, but I will say, and you will almost never hear me complain about the upper treble, but there is something going on in the upper treble that is making cymbals and some other instruments that land there sometimes sound a touch unnatural. The air is good and it does have a decent amount of shimmer, but I am getting a little bit of a metallic or tinny timbre coming through on certain tracks. Otherwise though, I think they did a good job with the treble tuning in general. Now, as for its technical performance, it's good for this price point, but I would say it's not going to be able to compete with the Origin, the Chopin, Performer 5, or the EA1000. I would say it's about average, and it's probably going to be closer to something like the Cara, Quintet, 0D200, and Wind. So detail levels are decent. The soundstage is actually maybe even a little above average. It also has a fairly open presentation, and it has a pretty good forward depth as well for this price range. So while the sound is more immersive than what you might typically see at this price point, instrument imaging and focus is still about average. So vocals do have fairly good center focus, and you can, for the most part, place instruments within the sound field, but they don't feel very anchored, and they can sometimes sound a little more like they're kind of floating within the space. So if I had to try and determine where I feel the PA02 stands in terms of the competition and just its overall value, as I had mentioned a moment ago, I feel like the PA02 is about on par with the Cara in terms of its technical performance, but also I think it's tuned just as well or better than the Cara. And it wasn't long ago that the Cara was one of my favorite IEMs under $200, and it was topped only by the Chopin and the Performer 5. But the Chopin and Performer 5 are both slightly more expensive sets. As a matter of fact, all of these sets I've compared the PA02 with are more expensive. Now, when I was testing the IEM and doing my comparisons, I actually compared it with about 15 sets between about 150 up to about 275. Again, that's during my actual testing, and I don't want to list them all, but as far as sets that I've mentioned in this review, so the Origin, Cara, Performer 5, Chopin, Quintet, the 0D200, and the Wind, those are all more expensive sets and are right at or over $200, and the PA02 is $189, so it's not much cheaper, but it is a little cheaper. And to be honest, while I do feel like the Chopin and Performer 5 perform way above their price points and are definitely worth spending that extra $10 on, I really do feel like the PA02 is a very good IEM for $189. It's not exceptional, but it's good. And while I don't know if I can give it a strong recommendation, because again, for $10 more, you can get the Performer 5 or Chopin, I do still think its performance deserves a recommendation because it really is a good value when you take the entire package into consideration. And again, it does sound really good for this price point. So that concludes my review of the Pula PA02. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please, like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.